Okay, so there's a lot of reasons that we want to be focused on safety. Emergency room visits are not cheap. So, we want to just avoid that, all the expenses that come with dangerous situations and with injuries and with loss of property. So we want to, essentially be saving ourselves some money by avoiding those types of scenarios. And hopefully more importantly is the human element. So we're working with our families, ourselves, our neighbors, and we don't want to see anybody get hurt. If you yourself are going to get hurt, it's going to take you away from the operation for a long period of time. And nobody wants to be responsible for someone else getting hurt on their operation. And there's all sorts of things that can happen when we're working with pumps and tractors and woods operations. There's a lot of spinning, rotating parts. A lot of the chemicals that we're working with for pan cleaners and all that have risk for our vision and respiratory health, and then burn hazards, all of that. We also, whenever there is an accident, it's very likely going to slow or stop production. So in my tractor safety programs, I'm always telling the participants, if something is wrong with that piece of equipment, it's better to take, an hour or so and stop and to figure out what is wrong with that piece of equipment, as opposed to just keep driving it until it falls apart and like totally seizes up or is totally broken. And then you're out of production and that is shut down for months maybe, and that's going to be a very expensive, loss there. Also, many farms will go out of business after serious accidents occur on the farm. So this is it's actually a very high percentage of farms that when there's a death or a serious injury around the farm, due to the depression that can set in after that, or just the financial burden, a lot of times those operations will go out of business. And also we're concerned about our reputation, so of your own business and of the industry as a whole. So we don't want, dangerous situations to be, front page of the newspaper and to have that tagged onto your business and to the maple industry as a whole. So, really, we just obviously don't want to see anybody get hurt, and we want to keep our family and workers and customers all safe and healthy. I don't know how many of you have met Henry Marcus. He was the state inspector, really focused on the maple industry and maple quality for decades in Vermont. And Henry has been put in the hospital 3 times from tasting syrup. And it was all preventable things that, the producers said, there's something that just doesn't smell right about this. And Henry's way of figuring out what's wrong with syrup was to taste it. And sometimes you don't quite figure out what's wrong in the first couple sips. So you take a couple more samples of it. And, between pan cleaner being left in the evaporator in high quantities and air injection systems, or, weird chemical reactions that you never think of, like plastic and glycerin, there's all sorts of just random things that happened that were all a result of producers not kind of slowing down and stopping and thinking about what they were doing and doing a thorough job at what they were doing. So we don't want to see anybody like Henry end up in the hospital. So we're going to try to get some of these, safety thought processes in place. So some of the topics I want to hit on today are fire safety. This is a key component of making maple syrup. I'm going to give you some resources around ergonomics. So just helping you to, use your body more efficiently. We'll hit on chemical safety and spend some time there. and talk about some agritourism and emergency preparedness topics as well. So I'm sure that a lot of folks out there, I think that the majority of the maple industry is still using firewood for firing the evaporator. And no matter whether you're using firewood or oil or whatever your fuel source is, we're producing a lot of heat in the production of maple syrup. And we need to, be making sure that we're checking those systems and making sure that everything is safe. So in this picture here, we've got essentially, a giant tinder box that's right here next to the smokestack. So, there's definitely a risk that there's going to be some of those embers that are coming down, laying in sawdust piles, whatever that may be. So it's just something that is inevitable, and we need to be prepared up for and trying to, not leave, sawdust and highly flammable materials laying around. The sugar house itself, for most people, we get these timber frame structures, really beautiful, really iconic, really dry timbers. So we've got a lot of highly flammable materials inside and part of and outside the sugar house. So some of the best practices when it comes to fire safety should really be maintaining at least 3 feet of distance around the evaporator and especially around the firebox door. We want to clear away flammables, so all that bark and shavings and everything that come off of the firewood. Want to be cleaning that away, several times throughout the day as you're boiling. And you want to have some materials around for putting out fires. So you should have several large capacity, like 10 pounds or so of all-purpose, the ABC fire extinguishers. You want to have hoses on hand if possible. I know that can be difficult where, a lot of times the sugar house isn't heated all the time, but if you can have that water source running and available and ready. And lastly, we just want to replace old outlets with some ground fault, outlets that will trip for any safety hazards for things that are plugged in. So every year you get a handful of reports of producers that lost their sugar houses. We had at least 2, if not 3 here in Maine this year. So definitely want to be prepared for that. Okay, any experiences or any procedures that anybody uses in your sugar houses for fire safety? Hopefully just some.
We don't have running water, so we have lots of fire extinguishers.
Yeah.
And we do have a tank, with a electric pump that we could pump water if we had to, but we try to be really, really careful.
Yep. No, that's just really important to be prepared. Great to hear that you've got those fire extinguishers there. There's reports. Same thing goes with tractors and skidders and heavy equipment that you might have around. There's all sorts of reports of people being out in a field or away from the main farm. The equipment catches on fire. If they had an extinguisher there, it would have been some minor damage, or maybe they would have just cleaned the grease off of the piece of equipment. Yeah. But because they had to run all the way back to the farm, by the time they got back, it was a total loss. So that little bit of preparedness can be the difference between minor damage and total.
Yeah.
Jason,
Yep.
Just kind of a reminder too, not only is it important to have those fire extinguishers there available, it's important to remind yourself at the beginning of the season, throughout the season, actually where are those fire extinguishers located? We all are human beings and we become complacent. And if you have a fire and emergency, you're going to be panicking. And those thoughts about where in the world is that fire extinguisher is going to just escape from your mind. And I've had that experience before. We just remodeled our house last year and did the kitchen and I don't know, part of the garage, and I just amazed myself. All of a sudden I come upon a fire extinguisher in the garage that I'd put up 25 years ago, and I didn't even realize it was there. It was just
Right.
goofy. So pass that on.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm guilty of that in my own house. I'm like, I know it's under one of those 3 cabinets over there, but definitely worth that reminder. Absolutely. And if you're bringing, helpers in, you got a work crew, they should all be up to speed on that as well. Okay. So anybody ever get, sore back, have a hard time lifting what you used to, or I know I do, and I'm 35. So, one program, and this program is available in Minnesota and is just as big and robust as it is here in Maine, is our agri-ability program. So a lot of times our extension services will have contracts with this national agri-ability program. And the goal of agri-ability is to support any farmers with whether it's with disabilities or just with aging. So anybody who feels like they need assistance to just do things a little bit more creatively to do your task in a way that's easier on your body. So they have all sorts of little tools, whether it's just, these wheels to put a 5-gallon bucket on, as opposed to having to lift the bucket and move it, you can just roll it to where it needs to go. These are designed for honey production, but seem like they'd be great for maple as well, where, as you're draining the last of that bucket out, as opposed to sitting there bent over holding the bucket, you can just set it right here and let the last of it drip out. So they do everything from minor technologies like this, or putting pipe insulators around rakes or shovels so that the arthritis doesn't bother as bad, all the way up to hydraulic lifts to help folks in wheelchairs get into a tractor seat. So really awesome organization, and definitely worth a while to connect with if these types of things are anything that you're dealing with. I worked with them to help my grandfather get just an extra step on his tractor so that he could still get up on it. So when I checked a year ago, Carol Fury is the agri-ability contact person. So as Jesse said, I'm going to share these slides out, and this is a recorded presentation. So you'll have this contact information to come back to if you're interested. Okay, so I'm assuming that a lot of folks are using some form of chemicals in the Sugarhouse. Even for organic producers, we got to have something to help get those pans cleaned. I put diatomaceous earth in this category where you're using that for your filter aid. So there's all sorts of ways that chemicals make our life a lot easier, but a lot of them are pretty potent materials, and you really need to fully understand the risk around those to avoid creating dangerous situations. The one thing that I've heard is that a lot of producers will go down to your local equipment distributor, pick up a jug of pan cleaner, and there's no material safety data sheet or really any sort of label or anything with those. And that's something that I'm really trying to push a lot of our main distributors to get on top of. But all of these material safety data sheets, really by law, it's the responsibility of the person who is storing those to have those on hand. So if that didn't come when you picked up the jug of material, you need to either contact the distributor or contact the manufacturer of that product, or a lot of times you can just pull it up online and print out those material safety data sheets to have on hand. I don't know if you've seen those big yellow binders. I think I actually have a picture of one. You should have that right on hand, right near where you're storing those products. There's a lot of good information. We're going to run through what is listed in those material safety data sheets. One of the things is your personal protective equipment. So what type of, do we need to have a respirator or splash proof, aprons, gloves, eye protection? What do we need to have on when we're using those products? We're going to spend some time on proper storage of these materials. And I just want to reiterate this a couple of times, really important to read labels on all of this. So we did a Sugarhouse tour a couple of years ago, and this is a pretty big operation. And as you can see, here's the corner of the evaporator right here. And this is the storage for all their materials. So diatomaceous earth in this paper bag. Right below, they're super, the symbol right here, if you zoomed in, is the caustic symbol that is elevated. It's a liquid that's elevated up above your diatomaceous earth that all your syrup's going to run through. So a lot of stuff that's not quite right in this picture here. So running through one of those data sheets, so we've got our acetic acid glacial. I'm quite certain this is approved for organic production as a pan cleaner. And on that same, for the same product, we can see that some of the, that this product is incompatible with other products. So if that were to spill and come into contact with any bases, so, ammonia, any alcohols, hydrogen peroxide, all sorts of really common products, including heat and humidity. Is there any heat and humidity, 2.5 feet away from that evaporator there? Probably a decent amount. So this product really should not be stored in the Sugarhouse with the evaporator. Also, you're supposed to avoid heat, sparks, and open flames. So now, if someone were to come into contact with that, you could have skin burns, damage to the digestive tract if you were to ingest it. So if someone were cleaning their pan, and let's say they had an air induction system, so there's that lower component of the evaporator where you can't necessarily see down in there. If you're cleaning and you don't turn that induction system on to blow that all out, you're going to have that concentrated cleaning material just hanging out down in those pipes until you go to do your first boil. So, while that's a very specialized type of evaporator, any type of system, you want to be aware of where those low spots. Have I thoroughly rinsed this out? Am I making sure that nobody's going to be consuming this product? And then also on that, in the safety data sheet, you have what sort of protective equipment you should be wearing, so gloves and safety glasses, and especially for a lot of the powders that we're using, like our diatomaceous earth, you should have respirators on hand. That diatomaceous earth is also used in gardening, and you can spread that around on the soil. And there's so many little jagged points to it. They're microscopic, but what it's used for is slug control. So if a slug crawls over that diatomaceous earth, it scratches its membrane up to the point where it just kind of bleeds out and dries out. So if it can do that to a slug, it can do that to our respiratory system as well. So super important to have respirators on while you're using that really kind of dusty diatomaceous earth material. And just with the majority of what we're using, you just need a particulate filter. But to be safe, especially if you're using a lot of acids and pan cleaners, you can get combo cartridges that block out particulates like dust and also the organic vapors coming off of those chemicals. So these combo cartridges are what you're looking for if you're going to go out and get a respirator. So again, looking at this picture here, we're too close to the evaporator. We've got acids right over our diatomaceous earth that our syrup is going to go through as a finishing step. We've got powders and liquids all mixed in here together. And it really is just like, well, the chemical truck came, so let's just unload it here. So again, this is really not the ideal situation. So if some of these things spill, and you've got like your bleach, so if you got your bleach that you're using for cleaning your lines, and that is stored right next to your acetic acid, and those mix together, you can get some pretty nasty gas formation happening there. So ideally what we want to do is set up a system where you've got a room outside of where your evaporator is. Ideally it would be heated, but again, that's up to looking at the material safety data sheet and looking at the optimal storage conditions. Some of these things, especially agricultural pesticides, if they freeze, they're essentially no good the next season. But a lot of our chemicals don't necessarily need to stay that way, but it's important to look at the data sheet to see the requirements for those. Then we want to have separate storage areas for our bases, so the ammonia and bleach, and then a separate area again for our acids. So we're separating our bases and our acids. So your peracetic acid, all those types of cleaners, we want to have those in a separate area. And we want to have the dry powder materials above the liquid materials below that. And if you can, get a good ventilation system in there too. You can also buy these pesticide storage or chemical storage containers. These are, maybe $300, but if you've got an open house and you've got 1,000 people coming through your sugar house in a weekend, the general public, they don't necessarily want to see this, and you don't want a bunch of 4-year-olds running by and sitting on that pallet, right? So it's really important to either keep those separated somewhere where the public can't access that, or to have it in a lockbox like this. So I was mentioning, needing to have all those data sheets together. Here's one of the folders that you can buy, so it's really easy to see. You're not going to lose it. If somebody were to ingest or to have a reaction from some of these chemicals, anybody in that sugar house should know, like, that's where I go to find out the information. Do I induce vomiting? Do I not induce vomiting? Do I flush it with water? Like, what do I need to do? I need to be able to find those sheets quickly. Again, it's all about having an emergency plan in place, communicating with your crew, having the appropriate personal protective equipment on hand, and having the right emergency equipment on hand ahead of time. So, eye wash stations, if some of the products require kind of some charged charcoal, it might be worth just buying a little packet of that to have. So, and then safe storage is another just really important thing with all this. Does anybody have any experiences or concerns around the use of these types of products? I'm going to take it as nobody's had any negative experiences, which is a great thing to hear.
So I do have a little concern about the use of DE. I mean, can you elaborate a little bit more about I don't know. I'm just dumping that all over opening bags and dumping it into pails, then dumping it into my, into my syrup, of course. And,
Right.
I guess I should be wearing some sort of eye protection or respirator. I mean, you tell me if you could just elaborate a little bit more. What kind of dangers and what's the worst case scenario that can happen with DE? I haven't even thought about it before, really.
Right. So it's essentially that, like, you can have eye irritation from it, and you can have just like scratching and scratching of your respiratory system. So yeah, it's really best practice to have at least an N95. I think everybody's familiar with what those are at this point. So have at least a tight fitting N95. Like kind of the disposable looking ones, but they're a heavier grade. And I really prefer the half face mask with a P100 cartridge. So the N95 keeps out 95% of the particulates, but that depends on facial hair, the size, the shape of your face, all of that. The half face mask just fit a little bit tighter. They're more adjustable. And the P100 cartridges, they're just pink like fabric. They keep out 100% of particulates as long as your seal is good. So yeah, safety goggles and a P100 half face mask would be my recommendation for working with that stuff.
Because it's really just little pieces of glass almost, isn't it? Aren't they? They're like little fossils, aren't they? I mean, so that they can. All right. So we don't want that in our eyes.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. It's just little, if you look it up and look at the microscopic image of it, it's just these little jagged edges of old, like prehistoric shells, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then the other component of that from a maple quality standard is if you've got that in your sugar house, it's absorbing all of that humidity. And then, especially if you don't use it in the first season, it can get mildewy and that's going to transfer through to your syrup. So that's another reason to not have it stored in the sugar house and to only buy enough that you need in that one season. So Henry had enough experiences with all of this, the chemical concerns, that him and Tim Perkins and Abby Vanderberg put together this great chemical safety in sugaring operations fact sheet. So you can find that at this address. And I think it's also at mapleresearch.org. And it's probably something that's really concise. So, if you've got new people coming into the sugar house to help you out, it's worth having them sit down and read through that, just so everybody's aware. Okay. How many folks have agritourism Maple Weekend events? Is that something that Minnesota organizes? Show of hands.
Yeah, we do. We're located in a county park, so we get a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is the general public aware of the ins and outs and the risk that are involved in a sugaring operation?
No.
Not at all. So, last week I did a tractor safety training at a farm that is also a huge camping area that is 10 minutes from LL Bean, so one of our major tourist attractions in the state, and they have petting areas, and there's just endless stories of them backing up and like kids sitting, well, not running over anybody, but kids sitting on the tractor wheels and parents putting kids up on the tractors, and it's just the general public does not think about safety and concern when they're out at events like this. They come to events and they think this is fun all the way around. So it's up to you as the producers to think through, like, what are the areas of risk that I'm opening myself up to for liability by inviting the public out to my operation. So in the state of Maine, we have this agritourism liability sign, And the state law actually recognizes this poster and puts a lot of weight behind it. So if our producers have this posted and someone gets hurt in a way that is not just the producer being negligent, then the any liability on the producer is essentially waived. And we had a story of we had a sugar maker in Maine who they had their Maine Maple Sundae, and a visitor came out and she slipped in the mud on the way down the driveway. Turns out that she broke her ankle. That producer had bought this sign, but they hadn't posted it. It was still like leaning against the wall inside the barn. And because of that, the lawsuit totally moved forward. It would cost them about $60,000. And the lawyers told them several times, if that poster had been up on the outside of the barn, on the other side of the wall from where it was, none of this would really happen. So just simple things like that. But, as far as the mud, they probably should have had some signs up above, probably should have brought in some wood chips or something like that. So it's an expense, but it's all part of kind of being prepared for that liability that might come down on you. So we get a lot with some of our sugar house, 6,000 people in 2 days here in Maine. So a lot of preparedness that goes into that. Ideally, I tell everyone I would really have a rope around the evaporator. You see this all the time of parents sticking their kids right up into the steam. And it's not only is that a risk for the parents, for the kids, but it's a food safety concern too. If you're actually making syrup during these events, that's a really big consideration that you need to take into all of this. If someone who's doing a food safety training saw this picture, it'd be a nightmare for them. Really need to have people who are trained around those food production facilities. So things to look for is just obstructions in outdoor paths, so garden hoses, those types of things. Want to make sure we have the barriers around the evaporators. And all the volunteers and helpers that you're bringing in, you want to have everybody on the same page when it comes to emergencies. So where's the fire prevention equipment? Where's the first aid kits? Who do we call if something bad happens? And lastly, keep in mind that food safety. So that was very top of mind for everyone this last year with COVID. But I think that a lot of the practices that people put in place to be COVID safe for our Maine Maple Sundae will hopefully carry on down the road for general food safety considerations. UMash, that's the upper, I'm forgetting now. It's from your neck of the woods. So UMash is a group that really focuses on farm safety. And they have this whole series of farm safety checklists, and one of them is specifically for agritourism. So I like these checklists as a starting point, and it might be something that your operation could take this and then build it out to make it relevant for your business. And the reason I like it is that before an event like this, you've got 100 things that you're doing, plus you're trying to make syrup, plus this and that. So you can have a volunteer that comes in, or the high schooler from next door, give them this checklist and say, go look and make sure that all these things are up to par, and come back and show me what needs correction and what is good to go. I think we're kind of out of time here, but another thing from University of Michigan is emergency preparedness plans. So we have had several meetings with our local first responders, local fire departments, and we actually have an emergency management chief who oversees all of those teams. And they love it when farms and sugaring operations approach them and say, this is kind of the layout of our operation, and here's some things that we can share with you to make sure that everybody knows how to respond to emergencies as quickly as possible. So down at the bottom here, we've got this emergency farm plan. It's an electronic template, a fillable PDF. And it asks for everything as far as listing your local emergency contact information. So, all of your own information. Someone mentioned, when a fire hits, I think it was Les here, that your adrenaline is just flying. Your head is not clear at all. And it's very common for people to just completely blank on their own addresses, but especially if you have like workers in helping you. So it's just another reason to have all that written down and posted in a central location. And then this goes into, where are the water sources, where are the chemicals stored, where's the breaker box, all those types of things. So, all right. So, going into, especially, in the off season, that's the time that you want to be thinking about this stuff. You want to just kind of consider all the different aspects of the business, do some research and document all the risky aspects of the operation. So, if somebody's out there working in the sugar bush, if something were to happen to them, how would anybody know where they are? And is there a way that they can contact someone back at the farm? So that remoteness of the work is something that needs to be thought through. And then as we talked about, fire, electrical, and chemical hazards. And you need to develop and communicate with your crews and neighbors and the first responders, those plans for how are we going to mitigate risk and what are we going to do if an emergency were to happen. And lastly, it's just super important to always be, creating this culture and reward for the culture of safety. So, as we talked on the first slide, these accidents cost a lot of money, a lot of stress and depression. And so, just taking that little bit of extra time, think through stuff, make sure you're doing it in a safe way, and it could really save you a lot down the road. So sorry, I ate into your break time a little bit. I'm happy to stick around if anybody has any questions or comments.
Shelley or any of the other participants, is anybody up to speed on the agritourism laws in Minnesota? I know we have them. Is anybody familiar if we need to post a sign like Maine does?
I'm not sure, and it's something I've been wanting to look into. I know there is something available. I've heard a little bit of talk about it.
When we went up to Duluth and toured, was it Farmer Doug's?
Farmer Doug's, yeah.
He had a sign like that posted.
Yeah. And I just Googled here that I found a Land magazine article that the state has passed legislation that protects agritourism type activities, but whether or not a sign's required is kind of vague in here. So and it's probably something the board wants to address too. It's statute.
Yeah.
So statute.
Put that on the. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
The Maine Farm Bureau is actually kind of the primary distributor of those signs, so that might be a good contact for you to dig into that.
Yeah. So Jason, I wanted to ask too, if you've ever heard of anything about people getting cataracts from firing the evaporator. Have you ever heard anyone say anything about that?
Not that specifically, but it doesn't really, I mean, that's a great point of like staring right into a fire every 7 minutes or whatever it is, it's like.
Well, it happened to me. I believe that's what it was from when I was like 43 and 46 after we got our new evaporator with the intensifier arch. And my earlobes would blister And shortly after, my eyesight started going.
Wow.
And the
Yeah.
doctors really had no explanation for it. So
Yeah.
I was just curious.
No, it
If
makes
anyone's
sense.
ever-
And I'd never thought of that before, but some sort of eye protection, whether it's from the heat or, you know, even if it was like some sunglasses to go in there might be a good idea.
Well, now we wear, safety hat, pull down the stocking caps and wear safety.
Shelley, I've got,
But
We've got a
I-
full face shield for like grinding.
Yeah.
Shelley, do you
What's that?
do you turn off your blower when you fire?
oh yeah, we have to.
Well, we don't turn the fan off, but we do close the grate so it's not
I didn't hear that.
air.
We close the grates so it's not blowing air.
No.
Okay.
Another thing would be ice around a sugar house.
Yeah.
Watching that where people enter and leave.
Hmm.
I have a sign on my gate that says private, keep out.